So we're going to make cheese today. I'm going to walk you through my process for the cheese that I make. Cheese itself is pretty straightforward. I mean, it's got a certain process that every cheese goes through, but then there are many variations and all sorts of distinctions you can do and little things you can do at different times, most of which I don't mess with because I think they're incredibly fiddly, but your mileage may vary. So essentially what you get for your cheese is you're going to start with your dairy product, then you are going to acidify it, you are going to curdle it, and then generally you're going to hang it or press it and get some of the liquid out. And at the end of that, cheese. So you can use any dairy product you got. Milk is traditional, but it can be any kind of milk: cow milk, goat's milk, sheep milk, whatever. You can use cream, you can use a mixture. All that's going to change the texture and the final result. The more cream or fat heavy stuff that's in there, the more fatty the cheese comes out. You can even do it with skim milk if you wanted, although I really don't see the point. So that's the basis. Now, if you can, the one thing that you do want to try to avoid is homogenized milk. That's hard to do, but the point of homogenization is to make sure that all the fats and the particulates remain suspended in the milk, which is in fact exactly the opposite of what you're trying to do with cheese, which is get all of the fats and the particulates out of the liquid and drain the liquid off. So you need your dairy product. This is milk. It is non-homogenized milk. And I've got, for this batch, 3 liters of it. So milk, the cheese is fairly forgiving. I'm going to rinse my bowl because you do want relatively clean. There are people who would tell you that everything has to be sterilized to within an inch of its life, and I'm not going to say you shouldn't. I am going to say that I don't. So your milk goes in, and like I say, I'm doing, for my equipment, my facilities, 3 liters is a good quality. And you can see that there's the fat plug there on the top, which you get from the non-homogenized milk. So 2 liters. 3 liters coming up. And the first step in the process is to acidulate the dairy product. Now, people will talk about quick cheeses and where you acidulate it with vinegar, or I'm going to rinse my spoon. Acidulate it with vinegar or lemon. You heard about lemon cheeses. And that'll certainly acidulate your product, but it's going to add some flavors, and it's really kind of cheating if what you're trying to do is full-on cheese. What you want instead is a bacteriological culture. So you can, are you filming still?
I am still, yeah.
Okay.
You're just talking? Yep.
Yeah. So the culture, you can buy them, and usually they come powdered, and you mix them with milk, and that's how you start your culture. You can work with buttermilk culture. You can work with yogurt culture. They're all doing the same thing, which is consuming the milk sugars and acidulating, turning the milk and stuff into a slightly more acid base. Not base, an acid solution. Generally, the cultures are going to come in one of 2 kinds. They call them mesophilic and thermophilic. Yogurt culture is a thermophilic culture, meaning it likes the heat. Mesophilic still sort of likes heat, but it works at a lower temperature. Again, I'm lazy. I'm making lazy cheese. I'm not going to mess around with a thermophilic culture because I don't want to have to try to keep my cheese curds at 40 degrees centigrade for the time it takes for the culture to work. I want it to work at a slightly lower temperature. There are also all kinds of specialist cultures if you're trying to make a specific variety of cheese, but once again, I find that to be incredibly fiddly, so I don't bother. Now, I make cheese regularly enough that instead of the culture, what I have is whey from the last batch of cheese that I made. So the last batch of cheese, I saved some of the whey, which of course has the bacteria in it, and I mix that into the milk. Give it a nice, thorough mix. I want the bacteria well distributed. And almost immediately, the bacteria is going to start working on this, acidulating it and getting the process going. Slowly, it takes a while. The next thing is you need the curding agent, and that's rennet. And as with the bacteriological culture, you can get different kinds. Traditionally, it would be developed from the stomach lining of baby cows, from calves. That's the classical rennet. But there are also vegetable options, and I almost inevitably go for a vegetable rennet, and it just comes in a little thing here. I like the vegetable rennet because by that simple step, the cheese ends up being vegetarian, although not vegan. And what the rennet does is it's an enzymatic action, and it helps the cheese to curdle properly. So you put a little in. The recipes, if you find a recipe, will tell you to do 2 drops or 4 drops or whatever. But again, I'm lazy and I eyeball everything because I do this every few weeks and have been for years. So that's just mixing the rennet and diluting it out. It goes in. And now everything that's going to take place in here for the next 8 to 24 hours is going to happen on its own. So cover it and stick it someplace warm, if you've got someplace warm, and then forget about it. It needs, for my purposes, it needs at least 8 hours. I sometimes let it go longer because I'm lazy. This process has been optimized for somebody who is going to work. So a lot of this stuff is do this first thing in the morning, leave it, do the next step when you get back in the evening or the next morning, and so on, and stage it out. So for my purposes, that's done. Now I leave it, I come back to it tomorrow and move on to the next step. So about a day after you start the process, what you end up with is something which looks like this. And as you can see, the whey has already separated out beautifully. The curd is visible down there, but it's solid. I mean, this is all just the whey on top. Now, if we were using homogenized milk as opposed to unhomogenized milk, it wouldn't have that much separation at this point. At this point, it would still be solid, but it would be more of a custardy, puddingy texture because the curd would not have settled out as much. The next step is to cut the curd, and there's lots of discussions about the way to do it, but generally you just take a knife and slice, and you're trying to get, if you can, sort of a grid in there. So I'm going to do that, then rotate, try to do that. The curd is solid enough that the curd is rotating as I cut. And you can see as I cut, it's breaking up some. And you do that. Now, that's gotten cuts here, but there's some depth on there. It's a few inches deep. So you can buy special cheese knives, which are essentially right angle knives to get in there and do the, what is it, the horizontal cuts as opposed to the vertical cuts. So I don't have one. I use a potato masher because it does exactly what I need it to do. And the curd is soft. It's not like I need a sharp, sharp knife. So I just go in about halfway down, come across, cut that way, then the same thing a little bit further off the bottom. Now, once your curds have been cut, if you want, you can proceed directly on to the next bits. I like to leave it sit after this point for, either an hour or overnight again, because I'm perfectly happy to let it go for a long period of time. It'll get more acidified, and I'm fine with that. But once you cut the curds, what you're doing is you're letting more of the whey get out. You're increasing the surface area, more of the whey gets out. So we're just going to let this sit for an hour or two and come back to that for the next step. So the curds have been cut and have sat for a while. If it was me, I might let them sit overnight or whatever, because I don't mind the extra acid. I actually really like it. And it helps get just a little bit more of the whey out of the curds. But even just that hour or so that we've let it sit now, you can see that it's expelled a little bit more whey. Now at this point, if you're trying to make a couple of different varieties of cheese, there are a few things you can do. At this point, if you're trying to make like a Gouda style cheese, what's called a washed rind cheese, you can heat the curds a little bit at this point. And if you're doing that washed rind, you start swapping out the whey for hot water, which gives it a different texture, gives it that very smooth, sort of mildy Gouda texture. I don't bother. So what I'm going to do is, I've got my colander and my straining cloth. Same cloth I use for all of my purposes. This is, again, if you want, you can get full-on cheesecloth, but what you really just need is a fairly tight weave of food-safe cloth. So it goes in there. If you have ladles, you can ladle stuff out, but it's so much easier to just do that. And then you can see a lot of the whey is already dripping out. Now the only tricky bit about this next thing is finding a useful place to hang it. I have cats, so I can't just leave this hanging out any old place. It has to be a place which is at least vaguely difficult for the cats to get to. In the past, I've used empty rooms that I can close the door on. We've got a conservatory, and I can hang it out there and close the doors so the cats can't get to the conservatory. Or, and this is also a trick that I learned while I was still making this in a small apartment in New York City, is if you're not going to use your oven for a little while, you can actually, unless your batch is oversized, you can dummy it up, something that'll work in the oven. So I take my string. This is just a plain loop of string, because that way I can make a quick noose. And there you can see, and that's going to do the hanging, and you can see that that's already going to dribble. And then in my oven, I've got one rack, nice and high, and I've taken out all the other racks. And so I put that in there. And then just pull it up, tie it off, wrap it around, give it a little tie through there so it'll hold. And that's it. And then that sits for at least a few hours. 8 hours overnight is fine. 10 hours while you're at work is fine. Longer is also fine, because we're working at room temperature with this stuff now. We don't want the cheese to be kept cold, really. You can, but we've got the bacteriological stuff going on, and that works fine at room temperature. So there you go. That's an easy way to do it if you've got space in your oven. And you just let it sit until the next time, at which point it'll be time to put it in the press and move on to the penultimate stage. So This is the third stage of the process. The curd has been hanging for, again, anywhere 8 plus hours. The longer it hangs, the easier it is to start working with the pressing. So, as I said last time, I've got it in here because I have cats. So you don't have to do it in the oven, and make sure you don't turn the oven on, but you do sort of want to make sure that if you've got cats or something like that, that they're not going to get at it. Secure room or something. So if you remember what the cheese looked like, the curds looked like when we put them in there, you can see that a lot of whey has come out. That's the liquid that's come out. We started with 3 liters of milk, and what we've got now in terms of curds is that. And you can see it's firmed up reasonably well, but it's still pretty soft and still pretty wet. Now, if you're me, the first thing you do is you save your whey because you're going to need it for your next batch. So I'm going to just dump this here, because this way I've got the whey for the next batch. And you can also cook with whey. You can use it as liquid in breads, you can use it as liquid in soups, anything like that. So I always save the small container for my next batch, and the big container for just whatever I might feel like using. Now at this point, if you want, your cheese could essentially be done. At this point, if you just break the curds up a little bit, you can see that you've got a nice soft texture. And that, if what you want is just like a fresh cheese, sort of a farmer's cheese, that's it. You add your salt, you add your flavorings, and you're done. We're not going to do that though. We're going to actually press the cheese. So I'm going to go get the press, which I didn't do yet. So this is the stage where if you want to add flavorings to your cheese, you can. If you're going to put in chives or onions or whatever, this would be the step where you do it. You also put in a little bit of salt. If you particularly care, I'm sure you can find all sorts of recipes that will tell you in excruciating detail how much salt you should use for how much milk. I just kind of eyeball it. For those 3 liters of milk, I start with just about that much, maybe a half a teaspoon. You can deal with it later. You can adjust it later when the process finishes up. And then I just want to mix that in. So if I was going to add caraway seeds, if I was going to add chives, garlic, whatever, this is the point where I would do it. You can see that after a nice long hang, that it's really kind of crumbled up nicely. This is one of the big changes that you would have if you were working with pasteurized milk. You just don't get this kind of curd out of it. It's just a little bit finer, mushier sort of texture. So there you go. So that's that. Then, delicious. On to the pressing. Now, there are all sorts of presses, all kinds of designs. The point of pressing, of course, is to get even more of the liquid out of the cheese. The classic, most famous cheese press design is the one that looks like a butter churn or a barrel with a big arm hanging off of it, and you put the weights on it, and it gently presses it down. And those are fabulous. They're not small. I've had this cheese press for nearly a decade, and I got it when I lived in a smallish apartment, and it has the great advantage of not taking up much space. So you also need some cheesecloth, or you don't actually need something calling itself cheesecloth. What you need is a fairly fine cloth that is food safe, because you're about to put food in it. My wife had a bunch of this. You can see it's got a little pattern on it. I don't know if it's curtain cloth or muslin, but she said it was good and it was food safe, and I said okay, so that's what I'm going to use. And you put that sort of in whatever your press is, and then the curds go in. And this is the bit that can occasionally get a little messy. You also don't need anything even this complicated. Once you've got the cheesecloth, if you've got something that you can sort of put inside of something else with drainage holes at the bottom and weights that you can put on it, you can dummy up a press. You could take a couple of milk or cheese containers, poke some holes in the bottom of one, there, and then put that there on top of the curd, put some weights in the top, cheese press. May not look as nice, and I do keep thinking at some point I need to get one of those lovely wooden, beautiful cheese presses. The main disadvantage of this one is that it's spring-loaded rather than driven by a weight, which means that if you just got a constant weight on your curds, then the weight is constant. That's what it is. But if you spring-load it, as the spring presses down and as the whey moves out, the pressure reduces. So you do kind of have to be monitoring a spring-loaded cheese press, which is not a problem. It doesn't require a whole lot of monitoring. You just sort of walk by every now and then and give it another bit of a twist. So it's in there. I've got the cloth around it, and I've got my press in position. Now, when you're starting the press, once again, if you get a cheese-making book, it will talk about, press it for 1 hour at 10 pounds, and then another hour at 20 pounds, and so on. I, again, can't be too fussed by the specifics, but the crucial thing is you can't start with too much pressure on it, because at this point your cheese curds are still pretty liquid. If I really just crank this down, and be even worse if it was made with pasteurized, homogenized milk, if I really just cranked this all the way down, I would actually break the curds enough and start to force them through the cheesecloth. So instead, I'm going to get it partly down, and then over the next few hours, as I go about my business, I will walk in every now and then, and you can see it's already just even that much press. You can see the whey is starting to come out. So this you put on a tray or in a bowl, or I've got a little sink in the utility room, and I put it in there. And so I get a little bit of pressure on it. There. And then I'm going to leave it. And then, as I say, over the next few hours, I'm on into tomorrow morning. Every time I walk by, if I think about it, I'll give it another quarter turn until it's really started to get pressed. And then I'll really crank the pressure up, because I'm looking for a firm cheese. So the cheese has been pressing overnight, plus a little bit. So it's been going in there for a good, well, let's see, at this point, nearly 24 hours. And as you can see, the pressure has been, I've kept the pressure on, adjusting it as time goes by. And what we've ended up with, having started with 3 liters of milk, is this, a block of cheese that size. Now at this point, again, there's a few things you can do with it. If you want to put it in wax, which is kind of fun to do sometimes, this would be the point where you could do that. You put it into the wax and you let it go there. I usually just do one of two finishes with it. One is I simply do this sort of thing with it, where I take just a lot of salt and just rub it on the salt, on the edges, like that. And that'll start to give it a salt rind. And it'll still dry out. I mean, that's the same size when it started. There, and you can see the difference there. This one has been sitting out here on the counter for a couple of months now with the salt rind on it, just drying and curing. We use that for our grating cheese. Rather than a Parmesan, we tend to use that for pasta or whatever you need a grating cheese for. And you can see it's been, that's sort of the texture you get out of it after you put a salt rind on it and let it sit on your counter for a couple of months. Now, the other thing I do with it is make sort of a feta style cheese. It's exactly the same process to this point, but instead of doing that, I take some of my leftover whey and make a nice, strong, salty whey brine. I'm just guessing again at how much I put in there, but it's a lot of salt, because if you remember, the cheese itself did not have very much salt in it when I was making it. So I've got now here, with the whey, is an acid brine. So it's salty and it's still acidic. And then when the cheese goes in there, it'll continue to cure and salty and vinegary. And for this, just a few days, it'll be ready and you could start to use it. But it'll continue to get better for weeks and weeks and months and months. We sometimes will not even touch it for a month, 6 weeks, 2 months, and it'll be fine. This I keep in the fridge. The dry cheese stays out on the counter. And that's it. I've got those two finishes are what I do with the cheese almost all the time. And it's the same process up until the very beginning. You start with your dairy, you add your bacterial agent to get the acid going. In my case, I'm using whey. Otherwise, you use your starter. You add your rennet, your curdling agent. You let it sit. You cut it. You hang it. You add at that point any sort of spicing that you might think you want to add, any other ingredients, and a little bit of salt. You press it, and then in my case, I either put it in the brine or make a salt rind. And that's it. And as you can see from the stages that we've been talking about, while it may take 2 or 3 days to get to the point where you're ready to let it sit, no stage is taking more than 5 or 10 minutes at a time, and they're separated in time. I devised my process and clarified it because I was working full-time out of the house and I was in an apartment. So I could start stuff in the morning and do the next step in the evenings, or even let it roll over and do the next step the next morning over the space of a few days. And that's it.